Donald Trump definitely is more unpredictable. Trump would also make immigration tougher. Money will flow into dollar-denominated assets, could have a negative impact on India. There could also be a lot of volatility. Concerns around inflation as well as fiscal expansion. Strong stance in the favor of fossil fuels. Counterbalance China's influence on the world. Stronger ties between India and America. More action in the markets going forward in the next 4 years. There is no bigger news in the market today apart from the US presidential elections. The outcome of the US election always has a big impact on the global markets, and the re-election of Donald Trump is going to have a major impact. So in this video, we are going to talk about what are the impacts of the Trump presidency on the global market as well as India, and what are the sectors and industries that we will need to focus on in the next Trump presidency. Indian investors are very positive about the Trump presidency. They think that America under Trump will have a greater diplomatic relationship with India, and India would stand to gain a lot from this relationship. But on the other hand, Donald Trump is a protectionist president. He will try to have policies that favor the American economy, and he will put restrictions on the Indian trade, which could have a negative impact as well. Along with it, we all know that Donald Trump is an extremely unpredictable person. So we will have to brace for a lot of unpredictability and volatility in the next phase, the American presidential sessions. So let's start by going over how this presidency is going to impact Indian as well as the global markets. So looking at just the initial impact, we can see that the results have had a very positive impact on the global market. Indian index, the BSE index, is up 1.1% after this announcement. Japan right now is up more than 2%. And US is also up between 1 to 2% the pre-market trade just after the US presidential elections were announced. So the markets seem to be cheering on this announcement from the US government. But what we have to be aware is that there could also be a lot of volatility. The initial reaction definitely have been positive, but as things come along, there could be more volatility that we might have to brace on the currency front, on the commodities front, on the global geopolitics front, and maybe volatility would be slightly higher in the upcoming session. And like we said, the protectionist policies that Donald Trump has spoken again and again during his campaign could have a negative impact on India because they will restrict trade going out of India. So we have to be prepared for that impact as well. So this result has been a big mandate for the Republican Party. The party has won the House, the Senate, as well as the presidential leadership. With this strong government being formed in the US, there will be more strength to the US dollar. Money will flow into dollar-denominated assets, and that could lead to negative pressure on the Indian rupee as well as more depreciation on the already struggling Indian rupee. Now, if we examine the historical trends, you will find some interesting patterns. Historically, if you look at what happened in the last Trump presidency, we saw energy, defense, as well as industrial goods do really well when Donald Trump was the president. So those patterns are expected to repeat again unless there is a big shift in policy, and we're already seeing some movement happen in the industrial section, in the capital goods segment in India as well as in the global markets. Now, if you were to prepare for slightly heightened volatility in the market, I think going a little bit more defensive and focusing on high quality stocks could be something that might be important in the next few quarters in the economy. Now let's go over the sectoral impact of the Trump presidency. So the first sector that we look at is oil and gas. Donald Trump has a strong stance in the favor of fossil fuels. He does not believe a lot in the renewable energy segment, and he is a believer of the fossil fuel. So oil and gas segment could see a lot of movement. America could start manufacturing a lot of oil, and that could lead to lower oil prices, which could give a boost to Indian economy, bringing down inflation, leading to affordable long-term oil and gas contracts. In fact, if you look at the different Democratic versus Republican presidents, you would see that Democratic president seems to favor the renewable energy sources, the green energy sources, whereas Republicans Americans have a stronger focus on the fossil fuels. So that pattern could again repeat in the Trump presidency. In terms of commodities, we expect Donald Trump to focus more on infrastructure. And if there is more focus on infrastructure, obviously commodities will gain. Metals, coal, and energy, all parts of the commodity cycle would gain if there is more infrastructure spending. So in the short term, energy trade could be a good investment. US based energy companies could be a good investment, and Indian companies that gain from lower oil prices could also be winners. Now let's talk about defense and manufacturing. Donald Trump would have stronger contracts with India on the defense trades. That would lead to more growth in the Indian defense segment. Indian defense, which has been, the outperformer over the past year and has seen a lot of decline over the past quarter, could stand to revive with this stronger defense relationship. Donald Trump would also have a strong stance against China. Countries that import from China in terms of defense contracts could come to Indian defense companies. And as we are aware, India is trying to put itself across as a big exporter of defense goods, and that could be a positive for the Indian defense industry. So as an investment insights, you could focus on defense and defense manufacturing companies in India, expecting defense to pick up due to stronger India and US defense collaboration. Now thirdly, on the technology front, the technology industry saw a very big positive impact after the US presidential election announcements. That is because, they expect the US economy to be stronger, which means stronger deal wins for the Indian technology companies, which do a lot of technology outsourcing. But on the other hand, Donald Trump would also make immigration tougher. So Indian IT professionals will face challenges in getting their visa to travel to the US. So while that pattern, has been there for some time, and Indian IT has evolved with local hiring as well as nearshore centers to cater to US companies, Indian IT could be braced well for this impact. So as an investment insight, we will have to have a lookout on the deal wins that Indian companies are gaining because of a stronger US economy. But on the other hand, we also have to be aware of the constraints being put on Indian outsourcing companies because of the stronger immigration laws. Now let's talk about the automotive as well as the EV industry. So Donald Trump is not a strong supporter of EVs, right? Which means that EV manufacturing in the US would come down, which means that Indian EV manufacturing companies could stand to gain. They could export more, and there could be a boost to EV companies in India because of that trend. So as an investment insight, we expect Indian EV manufacturing companies, especially the hybrid category, to stand to gain because of this election mandate. Now let's talk about the pharmaceutical industry. So Donald Trump wants to reduce the healthcare cost for the Americans, but Democrats want to boost healthcare through public spending, whereas Donald Trump would try to focus on private healthcare and introduce competition in terms of pricing for the pharmaceutical sector, which could lead to price pressure for Indian exporters. But despite these challenges, we expect Indian generic pharmaceutical exporters to remain relatively robust despite these policies. US right now amounts to 33% of India pharma exports, and the revenue from the US forms 50% of the revenue of various pharma companies. So obviously we will see some impact. Indian investors could focus on pharma companies with a much more diversified product portfolio that have a good mix of domestic healthcare manufacturing as well as the exporters. So having talked about the sectors, let's talk about the macroeconomic impact of the Trump presidency. The Trump administration is going to focus on deregulation as well as lower corporate tax rates, which could stimulate the economic growth in the US in the short term. Donald Trump would focus on the lower interest rates in the short term, but his focus on self-sufficiency could also lead to higher inflation in the US economy, which would have impact in the global markets as well. This would lead to some disruption in the global supply chain, leading to pressure on certain commodities and maybe higher inflation globally. So while the focus on lowering rates could have a mixed reaction for the US economy, the concerns around inflation as well as fiscal expansion in the US macroeconomics definitely remain. Talking about India, because Donald Trump would focus on fossil fuels and more domestic manufacturing of oil in the US, the oil rates globally could go down, and And if that happens, India could import oil at a cheaper rate, which would lead to more fiscal strength for India. And secondly, lower oil prices would lead to lower inflation in the Indian economy. So this trade could lead to strength in the Indian economy as well as greater fiscal balance for India. So as investors, we definitely need to be well aware of the inflationary pressures that could come because of these drastic policy changes that Donald Trump could sort of bring in, and we have to keep a lookout on the fossil fuel as the oil prices. Talking about the geopolitics, especially where India is involved, we could see stronger ties between India and America as Donald Trump would seek to counterbalance China's influence on the world. So the China plus one trade, where India gets a lot of trade contracts as well as manufacturing contracts instead of China, could be something that you could see more focus on in the Trump presidency. Trump has also expressed admiration of the Modi government, and that could lead to better relationships with India. Trump also would have a softer stance on Russia, potentially could pull out of the NATO, or sort of seize the war in Ukraine, which could lead to Russia getting more aggressive in Ukraine. So that could again flare up the conflict there, lead to big geopolitical changes. Talking about geopolitics again, I think in the second war that's going out, which is the war in Israel and Palestine, Trump coming in could lead to greater strength for Israel and more hardship for the Palestinians. So in conclusion, next 4 years are definitely going to be very, very interesting and obviously very entertaining with Donald Trump as the new president. And as we said, Donald Trump definitely is more unpredictable, which could lead to more volatility in the markets and more action in the markets going forward in the next 4 years. That was our very quick and immediate. How do you think the Trump presidency is going to impact the Indian market? Please do write down in the comments and let us know. If you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and put down in the comments what you would like us to talk about next. Until then, happy investing.
Investment in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.